What is the best business entity structure for your client's specific needs? Business law attorneys rejoice. The State Bar of Wisconsin Pinnacle has a new book out, the Wisconsin Business Entity Handbook, that outlines the key issues you'll need to determine which structure fits your client's unique circumstances. Hi, I'm Peter Kramer, Digital Communications Coordinator with the State Bar. Joining me today to discuss this book and the importance of evaluating clients' business goals and selecting the proper entity structure is Professor Nathan Hammons. Professor Hammons is Director of the Law and Entrepreneurship Clinic at Marquette University Law School and is a contributing author of the Wisconsin Business Entity Handbook. Welcome, Professor Hammons.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Professor Hammons, I was hoping you could, I know I just jumped in and just did an introduction for you, but I was hoping you could also just kind of introduce yourself to us. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Again, Peter, I love your intro. If only it were that easy, if it'd be like, here's the short answer, here's what you need, right? Well, business law and taxation is very complex. Clients have incredibly different needs, and that's where, we're fortunate to have such a great resource here. So for my background, I actually started off as a litigator in Chicago, and then I was an in-house attorney for a few years at University in Chicago. I've been an appellate court attorney for a couple years, and I really didn't move into transactional law until it was over a decade ago when my wife and I moved to Milwaukee. And then I ended up launching the current clinic that I direct at Marquette Law School called the Law and Entrepreneurship Clinic. And, through that and early in my career, at least in Wisconsin, I really, got to work with a wide range of small business owners and entrepreneurs and was able to, help them, kind of chart a path forward, for the key initial question: what business entity should you select? How do you structure it? How do you maintain compliance and whatnot? So I'm proud to report it's actually this month, January of 2025 marks the 10-year anniversary of my clinic at the law school. We've served a wide range of clients in all industries, and for the majority of them, choice of entity is a key question.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for taking part of this discussion. As one of the contributing authors for the Wisconsin Business Entity Handbook, I was hoping you could just share with us a little bit about that book. What kind of information does the book actually provide attorneys?
So I think it's just a tremendous resource where what it does is in each chapter deals with the major types of business entities or organizations. And it talks about both non-tax and tax factors for those entities. And, as I mentioned, the laws are incredibly complex. When you throw in tax law, employment law, securities law, it can be overwhelming to new, even, experienced practitioners. And I think this is a tremendous resource for both, again, new and experienced practitioners to consult as they have questions, as they are consulting clients.
So what then, I know that you said that the Law and Entrepreneurship Clinic has been in place for about 10 years. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit then about what kind of inspired you to contribute to this book. Does that experience have something to do with that?
It does. And also, the State Bar has tremendous publications. What they've had so far is individual publications on, wide range of topics. But, for the business law world, there's a great one on LLCs and LLPs. There's one on corporations. There's one on nonprofits, one on securities, mergers and acquisitions. But there wasn't one that was kind of a starting point to help practitioners who go, well, I'm not sure what my client should be. I'd like to compare and contrast the different types of business organizations. And so that's where I think this publication fills a gap.
So why, I guess maybe let me rephrase it. So who do you think then will most benefit from picking up a copy? Do you feel like it's newer attorneys, experienced practitioners, both? I mean, what is it about this book that is so important for attorneys to maybe consider picking up a copy?
I think both, honestly. I think all too often, there's a couple things. So for the new practitioner, many attorneys have had your traditional business associations or business organizations class in law school. Those tend to be case heavy, lots of subject matter covering, breach of, or, what are the duties that owners or, directors or whatnot owe to the organization. Whereas the practitioner, obviously those are important, but there's so many other factors that the practitioner who needs practical guidance on, what do they need to do to, counsel a client on a particular matter. And this book addresses that. And then in addition, for experienced practitioners, the law is changing constantly. And, from the recent legislative updates in the state just a few years ago to changes in tax law, where this can be a useful resource for, one-off, it's like, boy, I have a question. I need a refresher on this. They can consult this and get guidance.
So then talk to me a little bit about the book's structure itself. How does the book's organization sort of help attorneys find relevant law while doing that research?
Yeah, so I think it's a great organization. It has 9 chapters. There's an introductory chapter which introduces the reader to all the major forms of business organization. And then there's subsequent chapters that address, again, the major types. So you've got your sole proprietorship, partnership, which includes partnerships and LLPs. You have limited partnerships. You have limited liability companies, corporations, non-stock corporations, commonly called nonprofits, cooperatives, and then Chapter 9 is a catch-all chapter that includes a few other types of business entities. So this is kind of like the big broad structure. Each chapter then is broken down into subtopics that are actually, there's parallels with each chapter, right? So again, these important, non-tax factors like ownership, formation, personal liability, topics like that, in addition to taxation for that particular type of business organization.
So how does the book then explain statutes in a way that will help attorneys put the law into action in their practice?
Yeah, so I think, I don't know many practitioners that sit down with a particular, it's like Chapter 183 of the Wisconsin statutes for LLCs and read it from start through finish. Like it's, your eyes are going to glaze over. It's hard to do. And that's where what this does, it breaks it down. First of all, it pulls out the key statutory language and it explains it in a way that's easy for practitioners to understand. And it also organizes it by topic. So that's where, and in addition, in some cases, courts have interpreted that statutory language, so it will incorporate case law into it, which I think is all beneficial to the practitioner.
Very good. Yeah, that's very true. Your eyes would definitely glaze over if you're just looking at the text for, chapter and verse, basically, right? Mm-hmm. Talk to me a little bit then. You kind of already referenced this, but so the last major changes to Wisconsin's business entity statutes happened back, I think, in the spring of 2022. What do you think has been the significance of those changes, and how do you think that this book then highlights the most important things for attorneys in this area of practice to know?
Yeah, so the 2022 legislative update was kind of driven by what's called the Uniform Law Commission, or it's work that puts out model and uniform statutes. And they had this effort to harmonize business entity statutes, in particular, Chapter 178 on partnership law, 179 on limited partnership law, and then Chapter 183 on LLC law. And what it does is it harmonizes those by using similar terminology. It allows for conversion from one entity to the other to be smoother, aspects like that. And there's a significant number of other states in the country that have adopted these same very similar model legislation. And so it's beneficial because there's similar terminology, but also if you have businesses that are operating in many jurisdictions, it can simplify it administratively and just from a legal compliance perspective for those businesses.
Okay. How does the book help attorneys guide clients through the process of choosing that right business entity for whatever it is that their venture is?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think a key, for any attorney, when you're counseling a client, the more information you gather, the better. Well, a key question is, what information do you need to collect, right? What's going to impact this? And I think what the book does an excellent job at is explaining what are the factors that can influence choice of entity. So, like I mentioned, I just conceptually found this helpful. I didn't create this. There's been some other practitioners who use a similar model, but it's to group the factors into both non-tax factors, like how do you form this entity, who can own it, what's the owner's personal liability, what's the administrative simplicity of this type of entity. So you've got that. And then the other big bucket, which is oftentimes drives choice of entity selection, are the tax factors. So, what's the taxation of the business and then the owners themselves under both federal and state tax law.
Is there an example of a common client scenario and maybe how this book sort of shows how to navigate the decision-making process?
I don't know if there's one. I can give a couple examples just because there's such a wide range of businesses, and in some instances, you might have different entities that can actually work for that business. One that we encounter is in my clinic, at least. I'll give you a couple examples. One is what you might call an emerging growth or technology company, where you have a few founders and they're not quite sure yet what their path forward is going to be. Like, they want to grow really big. Ideally someday they could, maybe sell the business for, very, very large sums of money. But they're not sure about their path forward. Maybe they want to go secure venture capital financing. Maybe they don't. They don't think the business is going to be that profitable initially. Well, for a client like that, and maybe they want to have lower costs, an easier administrative burden, an LLC might be a great option for them. Where now I refer to an LLC as it's great for a wait and see approach for many businesses, where you're not sure what you want to be when you grow up. Do you want to take on venture capital financing? Do you want to seek out an acquisition by a large, corporation? An LLC can be great in that circumstance. That's one, example. Another one could be, a services organization where, maybe it's a consulting company, law firm, other, similar type of organization that anticipates where it's going to be the owners that are running it. They don't anticipate growing, having at least, many, dozens or hundreds of owners. It's likely going to be highly profitable. And they want to not leave money in the business, but they want to pull it out. So that's an example where close consideration of taxation, like taxation under subchapter S, can really drive the decision. It's like, well, you could be a partnership, but or like at least maybe a limited liability partnership. Is taxation going to be higher for the owners? Possibly. Taxation under subchapter S, you could save on employment taxes. Then there's the question: do you want to be commonly called an S corporation, or a service corporation taxed as an S corporation, or would you actually want to be an LLC and elect taxation as an S corporation? So there's certain factors like that where, again, the more you learn about the business, who the owners are going to be, what's their path forward, what are their key concerns, can really influence choice of entity decisions.
Yeah, I think those are some great examples and really kind of underscore the breadth of this information that's included both in the book and in this area of practice. Are there any sort of common mistakes that you see attorneys make when they're advising clients on business entity selection?
Yeah, I don't know if I would call them mistakes, but what I might refer to as best practices. One is to really learn a lot about the client. So gather as much information about them and their plan and their path forward. I teach my students about, when I was in law school, I had not heard this concept called client-centered lawyering, but really what you want to do is obtain as much information as you can and give the client options. So instead of thinking, oh, I know that an LLC is the best for you, I know that a corporation is the best for you, really put them in the driver's seat and objectively present your analysis and guidance to them so that they can make a choice as to what their path forward should be. Another one is that I'll give you two other pieces of guidance. One is that sometimes attorneys will default to what they're comfortable with, right? Like if I have a practice where I just predominantly work with corporations, maybe I'm going to be more likely to recommend that because that's what I'm comfortable with. I'd say, again, having the client, in the driver's seat, try to offer objective analysis, comparing and contrasting the different types of business entities and not just doing what, you as an attorney are comfortable with. And then lastly would be, trying to think what else. My other piece of guidance would be certain industries have preferences for business entities, and it's okay to push back on those a little bit. Sometimes we'll get clients who will come in and they say, well, I'm an S corporation or a, Wisconsin, a corporation that's elected for S taxation under subchapter S. And when we ask the question, well, why did you pick that? And they said, well, my CPA, my accountant recommended that. It might be the right fit, but not necessarily. All right. Sometimes you might have, practitioners or professionals who are not attorneys who have a particular preference. Another very common one is in the venture capital industry. Many VCs will say you have to be a C corporation if we're going to make it before we invest in you. Oftentimes that is correct, and many will insist on that. But in other instances, an LLC might actually be an appropriate business entity for that particular type of startup. All right.
Those are really great examples of, and we appreciate the practical tips here shared with us. Is there anything that you kind of foresee that is like upcoming legal developments or trends that do you think could further impact business entities in Wisconsin?
So I'll give three, and they're not directly to the statutes that govern business entities. The big ones that I'm keeping an eye on, at least, are with the federal tax regimen, because it was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 that significantly reduced the corporate income tax rate from 35% down to 21%. Now, there's and also introduced something called a 20% tax deduction, qualified business income tax deduction, changed personal income tax rates. A number of these provisions are set to sunset at the end of 2025, and that can significantly impact choice of entity. Another one is the Corporate Transparency Act. So this is federal law that requires owners of many types of business entities to report what's called beneficial ownership information to FinCEN. It's a department it's part of the U.S. Treasury Department. And there's been a significant amount of federal cases that have, or the legislation is bound up in that, where I think at least two federal courts have enjoined it. The Supreme Court overturned one of those, but one is still in effect. So basically keeping a close eye on this, and what happens with that is another key aspect for practitioners to watch.
This is sort of a related question then. Is there any advice that you would give to attorneys looking to stay ahead of any of those kinds of changes in business law?
Well, I'll give the state bar a plug. Honestly, the Wisconsin Lawyer Magazine, the other publications, the bar does a great job at updating publications like this one. In addition to that, because things are they move so quickly nowadays. There's great continuing legal ed courses, conferences. I think all of these are great to stay on top of things.
Thank you so much for the plug. Much appreciated. So to kind of end on a note, then I was wondering if we could turn just real quick to sort of your experience then as a contributor for this handbook. For other sort of budding legal authors, would you share just a little bit about your experience working with our Pinnacle Books team?
Sure. So first of all, the team was just terrific to work with. They gave terrific guidance, great suggestions, really supportive throughout the entire process. And I'd say, you learn a lot through writing a publication like this. And I certainly did. And it's, I appreciate, having this community that can, benefit, from this publication. It's very exciting. I actually have a copy of it right here.
Oh, we love it. Yes.
It's exciting to see it in print. So for both, junior and experienced practitioners, I would highly recommend, getting involved with, helping to author a publication if that opportunity presents itself.
Thank you very much for the kind words. Is there anything else that we didn't cover, anything that I didn't ask you that you would want to make sure that you would highlight?
Well, I think
final words of advice, anything like that?
Let's see, final words of advice. One is to use these publications. And I think all too often, and at least in my experience, where I was used to using either Lexis or Westlaw, Practical Law has been, a very popular resource of late for transactional attorneys, and not recognizing that many of the publications or resources that Lexis and Westlaw have aren't Wisconsin specific, and that the publications of the State Bar are prepared by practicing attorneys that really provide practical guidance and take advantage of those publications.
Well, we will leave it there. Professor Hammons, thank you so much for talking with me and for contributing to this handbook. We hope attorneys will find it of considerable value and will pick up a copy.
Sounds great, and thank you very much.